I've always followed Texas State, Southwest Texas sports because that's my school. That's where I went. I didn't go to UT. I didn't go to A&M. Tell you the truth, also, both my kids went to A&M for different reasons, though I spent 5 years going to their sporting events. But, when it was over, I said, I'm not doing no hullabaloo connect no more. I'm not an Aggie. I'm a Bobcat. So, when Dennis Francione came over and got hired and we went D1, that's when I started coming back to Texas State. The kids were out of college. I'm not an Aggie. I'm a Bobcat.
I'm so honored to have my friend Tommy Madden here. Tommy is a great Bobcat, great alumnus, great friend of the university. I think he's one of 18 people that has a season ticket to every athletic event we have. And you can't even make them all. You just do that to support the athletics program. But you're just like the best, Tommy. So thanks for joining us.
Well, truthfully, I try to make them all.
You make a lot of them.
But I can't. Living in Georgetown, it's the commute gets kind of harder every year. Just because of the population growth.
It's you come down on 1:30 to get
1:30. If there wasn't a 1:30, I don't think I'd be the person to have 18 season tickets. No, I'll take that back. I'd still support.
Still do it.
Yeah.
And not only that, but you always, whenever we play softball or baseball in Texas, you're there as well. And so it's not just the home games too. So you kind of go to the neutral site games as well.
Well, I try to, especially living in Georgetown. Austin's close.
Yeah.
And Bryan College Station and Baylor. So, I like to show my Texas State pride to everybody I run into and everybody I know, and especially my friends that are alumni to those three universities.
Absolutely. So we need people like that to be spreading the news about what's happening at Texas State. There's a saying, till the whole world knows our name. So you're one of those guys doing it.
Till the whole world knows our name.
That's funny. Well, let's start like we always do, hearing about your Texas State story. Like, how'd you end up here?
I don't know if it's a long story or a short story, but growing up, I was one of 8 children. So us 7 brothers and sisters, when we went on vacation, it was a community tent with my 2 parents and our 2 boxer dogs, and wherever we went to travel to go camp out, Lake Canyon Lake was one of our favorites, and the only way we could get from Dallas to Canyon Lake was come through San Marcos and go down Ranch Road 12 and hit Canyon Lake. And just every time as a kid growing up, just going through this campus, you kind of go, wow, what is this place? And then when it came time to start applying for colleges, I never considered UT, never considered A&M as Southwest Texas. So,
did you all stop at Ocarina Springs at all?
No. Being one of 8, that wasn't in our budget. It wasn't in our budget. So a big old canvas tent was pretty much, and a hot dog on a campfire. That was our budget.
That's funny. So you grew up in Dallas. So talk about high school. What was that like for you? Were you involved in athletics or
I played
extracurricular stuff?
Played football, and as in middle school, it's funny when you're in middle school athletics, the coaches kind of insist that you participate in other sports, and it's funny. I'm kind of reliving a little bit that through my grandson Herman, who's running track, and you look at all those kids out there running track and all the events they were running, and then the other sport that they made us go out for was soccer, which is kind of sad and funny in one way because the football coaches made all the football players play soccer, and all the soccer kids who really knew how to play soccer were almost getting pushed aside. But I think the soccer coach figured out if he was going to win games, he's going to play the soccer kids and just make the football guys run back and forth, stay in shape.
So you come to Texas State. What was your major?
As a freshman, like all freshmen, you don't really understand what you want to do. So try a little bit of everything, introductory to business, and I'm sorry, that kind of put me to sleep. So, but
me too, by the way.
You too, by the way. So I finally, tried a pre-vet course, animal nutrition. But then biology and the sciences always fascinated me. So actually, I was a pre-med student. So I have a degree in biology and a minor in chemistry.
Now you're currently working in farming and ranching, but was your family involved with that?
No, growing up, we always tried to live out in the country when we could, and we always had horses and, ponies and even a goat at one time, and the chickens were just to look at, So nothing in my family background had me in any kind of an agricultural endeavor. So, but when I got out of school, I worked my way through school for 5 years at Grin's Restaurant.
Now, you worked at Grin's, so we had
Grin's
the owners of Grin's on here earlier,
Yes.
and I love your connection to Grin's, because a lot of students did work their way through college at Grin's.
Mm-hmm. Well, there were other opportunities for them to work. I just fell into the right group of guys, and I think you knew the owners, Paul and Johnny, and just great guys. And what those guys had to put up with when you think back then.
You wouldn't hire you right now.
No, I wouldn't hire me. No, I probably would hire me because I needed the job and I showed up.
And you worked hard.
Right? Yeah, I worked hard and I showed up because I needed the job and I had to work. So I think they liked me in that respect.
Yeah.
They kept me around for 5 years for that. So that.
What were you doing there?
I was a cook.
Oh, really?
So you had two choices. You had a cook or a waitress. So the guys were the cooks and the ladies were the waitresses. Now, there were a few ladies that decided to be cooks instead of waitresses, but it was a little bit different concept back then. It was you'd pull up to the counter, you'd order, they put the order up, and then once the order was ready, then the ladies would deliver it to the table.
What was your favorite thing to cook?
It's bean and cheese nachos.
Eventually, you meet one of my favorite Bobcats, Sherry. So how does that happen?
Yeah, well, Sherry is not a true Bobcat.
But she's an adopted Bobcat.
Yeah, but she's an adopted Bobcat. So Sherry and I, when I got out of school, we can go back to when I was a pre-med student, so I didn't really score really high on the MCAT.
There's a lot of pre-meds, not as many post-meds.
Yeah,
so
not a lot of post-meds.
You're in good company.
Well, the other thing that was occurring back then in 1980 was the first true oil boom.
Yeah.
I mean, the oil field was going crazy. And, here I am working minimum wage for the last 5 years. And, I started doing the interviewing process and what my options were. And the oil field industry came into San Marcos recruiting for oil field engineers. And, if you had a science degree or you're good in math, if you could walk and talk, they were trying to get you to come out and work with them. So going to Houston, working in the oil field, it was a tremendous job for a younger person. I can't tell you how much money I was making back then compared to what I was as a student, poor student working through school. And now you're an oil field engineer offshore in the Gulf of Mexico. Well, the great thing about it was 7 days on and 7 days off. So my 7 days off as a 24-year-old or 22-year-old, I could go out and go visit my friends back in Austin, wherever else. So, out dancing, at I guess not quite the square, but there were different bars in Austin that you could go country and western dancing. Mm-hmm. Happened to see a really pretty brunette across the room, and asked her to dance and had a good time dancing. Got a phone number, and when I dialed it back the next weekend,
it was her.
It was her.
It was a real number.
Yeah, it was a real number. I don't know if anybody's experienced that before, but
I have.
I had a real number. So the rest is history.
Yeah, that's great. So how long have you guys been married?
We've been married 42 years.
Wow, that's great. The oil boom of the early 80s turns into a bust.
It was turned into a bust.
Oh, yeah. 85 or so, 84, 85.
84, 85. Yeah. 86 turned the bus, and I'm still working. But now the people that are getting laid off, the guys that are staying there that they like me, we're starting to work instead of the week on, week off. It went into be 2 weeks on, 1 week off, 3 weeks on, 1 week off, and then I'm starting to have children, and Sherry's staying at home, and I'm offshore on an oil rig. You know, so. I think by that time her parents figured that, hey, this guy's a pretty good guy. So they asked me to come join the family business, and that was back in 88, and that happened to be the cattle business.
And that was up in Georgetown?
Well, no, it was actually in Austin, but the commute from Georgetown to Austin wasn't very bad.
Okay.
So we moved to Georgetown and I worked out of Austin. And then we moved into the family place in 89.
You get back into kind of like traditional, I guess oil business is pretty traditional for Texas, but back into farming and ranching, and you're running this place now, right? The family business, Sherry's family's business.
Sure. I do everything on the outside, but my brother-in-law, Jim Schwartner, he's the boss.
Okay.
So, he runs, I'm doing everything on the outside, all the cowboys, all the farming, all the ranching, and he's in the sales department and, makes all the financial decisions.
So it's interesting because we have a vice president for Round Rock up there, and she's from Great Britain, and she loves learning about Texas culture and style and food and so on. But you've kind of taken her under your wing a little bit to teach her a little bit about the farming and ranching life, and I think you've actually got on a horse and done some other things with her as well. Talk about Julie Lessiter and your experience with her.
She is tremendous.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, what she's done for that campus and even the Williamson County community, she's really made inroads, especially Round Rock, all the Chamber of Commerce. She probably knows more people in Williamson County than I do after being there for 40 years. But anyway, I belong to a little club that's been around for about 50 years called the Steak Fry Club. And what it was a group of men back in Georgetown started this little business club, and every month somebody would host some steaks and throw some steaks on the grill and bake a potato. But what it's turned into over 50 years is like 125 business people. And once a month somebody hosts. So I said, well, I want to host this month because I want to take you guys down to Round Rock, and I want to bring all these Texas A&M, UT, Baylor guys that are my friends, and I want you to come see what we're doing down here in Round Rock just so you can understand what a tremendous job Julie's doing, what a tremendous things happening here in Williamson County. So being in the cattle business, I happen to know a few cowboys that work for us, right? And not that they had a choice, but okay, boys, for this steak fry club down in Round Rock, I want you to bring 2 horses. So anyway, Julie just got the biggest kick out of it in the world, and she actually got to ride a horse, and I couldn't believe it for the first time ever that she got on top of a horse, and it was a real cowboy horse.
Yeah, and she's a great athlete, but she this was like one of her favorite memories, I think, is on your horse. And
oh yeah.
That, there is so much growth going on the Round Rock campus. I just saw some data this morning that we've had 3 times as many freshmen apply to Round Rock than we did last year. And the year before was the first year we had any freshmen at Round Rock. This past year we have like 60 freshmen. We might have, I think, 300 or 400 freshmen there this coming year. That campus is just going to blow up there.
Well, it is, and talking back on my history through Southwest Texas in those days, I had to work my way through school.
Yeah.
And back then, and it's shocking, and you can look it up, but 15 semester hours in 1975 was $135.
Yeah.
Room and board at Arnold Hall was $500. So you literally could work your way through school, come out debt-free, not owing any money to anybody. It took me 5 years, but when I graduated from college, by working the 30, 40 hours a week at Grins and then taking my coursework, I was debt-free.
Yeah.
But move that forward into the Round Rock campus, so not everybody can afford to leave home and come live in San Marcos and live away from home. A lot of people got to stay at home or have already established families, and they want to go back and either get a degree or finish a degree, and Round Rock is a perfect place for it.
I want to come back and talk about athletics in a second, but the segue, I think, is about your memorabilia collection. I'd love to hear how that started, and then what do you have now? I know you got some really cool pieces.
Well, you were talking about my wife Sherry earlier. She's got as much or more storied history at Southwest Texas than I do, because her grandmother was a 1905 graduate of Southwest Texas Normal School. I think she was part of the second graduating class, and people go, what's a normal school? Well, a normal school was a teacher's college. So that was, I guess, the place to go if you were going to try to be get into education in the state of Texas.
Back then, and you didn't get a teaching degree, you got a certificate, because we weren't a 4-year school back then.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you did 1 year, I think you were 1 through 6. If you did 2 years, you could teach to the 8th grade. Yeah. If you did 3 years, you could do a full high school curriculum.
Yeah.
But anyway, so my first memorabilia that you're asking me about, well, Sherry had her grandmother's pedagogue, 1905. And when you open up that pedagogue and you see those young people back then, they're no different than the kids down at Sewell Park right now.
Yeah.
Some of the biggest part of that 1905 pedagogue in the back pages are the students or kids back then swimming in the river.
Yeah.
And and there's two other things too. Talk about sports memorabilia. One is they had three teams. They had a basketball team.
Women's basketball was the very first sport we had.
And they had a tennis team. And it's, if you've ever looked at anything of ladies in the 1905, they had dresses down to their ankle, and they're expected to play tennis, in the Texas San Marcos heat, which is unbelievable, right? And then the other thing, which is really, really cool, is they had a club baseball team.
Yeah.
And it always, it just I don't know. I'm real proud of the fact that this picture has all these guys. There's, I guess, 10 on the baseball team, maybe one or two pitchers. And you look at, we got 10 pitchers now. They only had one back then. But the funny thing is, when you look at the 1905, it's all ragtag.
It's like homemade uniforms.
Yes, everyone's different. They got a T on them. Some got a T. I mean, it's a fascinating picture because if you look at the Baylor or the UT or the A&M, they got the sprucey uniforms on, and and I always kind of feel like we're still that little brother fighting our way up the ladder just to try and prove that we're just as good or tough as you are. Yeah. In a lot of respects, we are.
So you start off with the yearbook.
Right, the pedagogue. And then knowing, my pride, I've always had the pride of graduating from Southwest Texas because even, back in 1980, we still were the start of the university that graduated to the king, George Strait and the president. Yeah, right. And nobody ever had that of all my other, Aggie, Longhorn friends, whatever. And my wife's grandmother was her mother's mother, and she went to UT and her dad went to A&M, but she always knew what that degree meant to her mother. And the story goes, my second big it really got me started was LBJ's hat. And I think I have LBJ's hat. She was from a little town called Bartlett. I don't know if you know where Bartlett is. Yeah. It's not, it's still a small farming, ranching community. But anyway, they wrote all these celebrities. They were going to renovate the elementary school. So they wrote all these celebrities to say, hey, can you donate an item for our cause? Well, Lady Bird donated LBJ's hat. One of his Stetsons, and Sherry's mother, because I guess she just loved me so much, she made sure that she won that auction item, and she gave that to me for Christmas. So ever since then, just I pick things up here and there off the internet, or just have some of the stuff that I've collected over 40 years of being a graduate at Texas State.
Do you ever wear the hat or just have it on display?
No.
Does it fit?
No, I have a large brim, so his brim is smaller. It's shocking how small, his hat size is. So
that's fascinating. We just installed a great thing in our LBJ Student Center, a story of LBJ at Texas State. I ran into someone at an event one time, and he said, hey, I'm writing a book on presidential graveyards, and he'd been out to Johnson City to President Johnson, Lady Bird's tombstone, and he said, I went to Texas State's campus, but somehow I missed the exhibit on LBJ, and I didn't have the heart to tell him we didn't really have one. So we added one this year, and I'm not sure if you've seen it yet, but it's a beautiful piece that kind of explains his story here at Texas State.
Well, that was another thing that I actually got to pick. Well, I picked up two, I think, significant LBJ memorabilia. One of them was his pedagogue, his senior year. I have his senior year, and you flip through there, and there's LBJ.
He's in everything, right? He's in debate, and he's in student newspaper.
He's a student president of the newspaper. I think it was his senior year pedagogue. And then the other thing I have, and it's kind of tragic and sad, but, everybody knows the history of LBJ's elevation to the presidency was through the assassination of President Kennedy. Well, one of the most famous photographers was him. Photographs of LBJ was him being inaugurated on Air Force One with Lady Bird and Jacqueline next to him. Well, I picked up, the photographer had taken 16 of those snapshots, and he was personal photographer. Well, I actually picked up number 13, so it's not the exact picture that you see, but I have that picture of the original picture of him being sworn in on Air Force One.
I did not know about that piece. That's incredible.
Yeah, that is a very moving piece. And then I've got all his books and stuff. So. Well,
let's switch now finally to your fandom of Texas State, Southwest Texas State athletics. Right. What is it? Why should people care about athletics and higher education, or why do you care about it?
Well, number one, I love sports. Yeah. I think most people do love sports, and collegiate sports to me is the most exciting because it's so unpredictable and it's so full of ups and downs, and it could go either way. It can go either way, and you just don't know. And and Sherry doesn't like me calling boys and girls or men and women. She always tells me these are men and women. They are. They're 17, 18-year-old men and women.
But when you get to be old like us, they do seem like boys and girls, right?
Yeah, but boy, if I call a woman athlete a girl sport and men's sport, I never hear the end of it. Which is correct.
That's why you and I married so well.
That's exactly right. They keep us on the right track. So getting back into sports, I've always followed Texas State, Southwest Texas sports because that's my school. That's where I went. I didn't go to UT. I didn't go to A&M. I was actually raised Irish Catholic. So when we grew up, the first song I learned was the Notre Dame fight song. Mm-hmm. So we always followed sports and athletics, and we were all Notre Dame fans growing up. But when I came to Southwest Texas, and hey, this is my school, just like your high school. This is who you follow, and this is who you cheer for, right? Finally, when we become D1 and Dennis Francione comes over, and that's when I start. Well, tell you the truth, also both my kids went to A&M for different reasons. One's because they have architecture, and that's where my daughter went, and then my son idolized his grandfather who went to A&M. He wanted to be in the Corps Cadets, so so they did the A&M Corps Cadets and got involved at A&M for 5 years. So I spent 5 years going to their sporting events. But when it was over, I said, I'm not doing no hullabaloo connect no more. I'm not an Aggie. I'm a Bobcat. So when Dennis Francione came over, got hired, and we went D1, that's when I started coming back to Texas State. The kids were out of college. I'm not an Aggie. I'm a Bobcat. So that's where it all started.
Yeah. What do you think about this move to the Pac-12?
Oh, I think it's outstanding. It really is. So Sunbelt is a tremendous sports organization all through the Southeast. We've everybody from the East Coast now, and I think Louisiana's always known who we were just because of the softball rivalries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But anyway, going to the Pac-12, now everybody on the West Coast is going to know who we are. And there is still prestige with the name Pac-12.
Yeah.
So I think we're at the right place at the right moment to build this thing back up and, get us back into the P status, how you want to describe that. Yeah. But just so exciting to get back into an organization like the Pac-12. So I'm just really excited to see new country, new territory, and see new rivalries develop.
Do you have a particular road trip planned out for a football game yet? What's the place you really want to go to?
San Diego is beautiful. If you've ever been to San Diego, it's absolutely gorgeous. And I've never been up the West Coast to Oregon and Washington, and I want to go up there too, and even Boise State. So, there's so many new adventures up there.
Yeah.
So Colorado's a beautiful state.
There's no bad trips.
Yeah, there's no bad trips. Yeah. No bad trips whatsoever.
That's awesome. All right, Tom, we got one little last thing we do. We always ask listeners and viewers of the program to send me a question. So you get to be the podcast host here and ask me a question. And I don't know what's in there, so it'll be a complete surprise to me. But go ahead and open that up.
Okay, the survey says, right? Okay, here's your question. If your leadership style had a theme song, what would it be?
Theme song?
What would it be?
Cool and the gang, celebrate good times.
Celebrate.
Sometimes I feel like my job is to be the head cheerleader.
Right.
And there is, this line in our alma mater, or our fight song about "Till the whole world knows our name," and I think we have always punched above our weight, and I think that people still don't know much about us, and they're getting to know more about us now. And I think athletics plays a huge role in that. But I feel like it's always been my job to make sure we celebrate some of the great things that are happening here. And it's not just athletics, it's academics, it's student success, it's the success of our alumni. And so I feel like maybe my theme song, I might come up with a different one later on, but celebrate good times it would be a good one for me. Tommy, thank you for joining us today. I know it's a trip down here. You had to come down and fight the traffic, and then you got to fight the traffic going back home. But it's always a pleasure to talk with you, and it's an honor for us to have you part of this program today.
It was an honor to be invited, and it's an honor just to be an alumni of this university.
Well, it's an honor for us for sure. So Thank you so much, and thank you all for joining us here at the Current, where we learn more about Texas State by talking to the faculty, staff, students, alumni, and friends of the university to find out what's going on at Texas State. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, stay safe, everyone.